losing them, Poe.
What?
You're losing them. You better do the Raven.
Don't tell me what I better do.
Are you quite all right, sir?
Yes, everything is under control. Ladies and gentlemen, my second tale this evening, The Pit and the Pendulum.
Oh, sick. Sick unto death with that long agony. And when at last they unbound me, and I was permitted to sit, I felt that my senses were leaving me. The sentence, the dread sentence of death, was the last clear pronouncement to reach my ears. After that, the sound of the inquisitors' voices seemed to merge into an indeterminate murmur, but only for a brief time. And then I heard no more. The candlelight faded, and I sank into semi-consciousness. And silence, stillness, and night were the universe. My memory of what follows is a tale of shadows, tall figures that lifted me up and bore me in silence down, like the descent of the soul into Hades, still down to the limits of the limitless. All of a sudden, there came back to me sound and motion, the tumultuous motion of my heart, and in my ear the sound of its beating. And then, a pause which is all blank. Then sound and motion again, then thought, shuddering, terror, and the moment to comprehend my true state. So far, I had not opened my eyes. I felt that I lay on the ground, unbound. I reached out my arm and let it fall on a hard, damp surface, and for many minutes I strove to imagine where and what I could be. When I opened my eyes, my worst fears were confirmed. The darkness of eternal night encompassed me, stifled me, so that I struggled for breath. I still lay quietly, and I tried to exercise my reason. I could remember the interrogation and the passing of my sentence, but it seemed to me that a very long time had since elapsed. I knew that condemned heretics were often burnt at the stake, and there had been one such ritual on the night of my trial. So why the wait? Victims were in immediate demand. Had I been left to starve in this world of darkness? Whatever was to be my fate, I knew that the result would be death, and a death of more than customary bitterness. But what would be the mode? And when would be the hour? I strove to my feet and thrust out my arms to find the limitations of my prison. I moved cautiously forward, straining my eyes for some faint ray of light, but all around me was darkness. At length, I encountered a wall, solid wall, seemingly of stone, smooth, slimy, and cold. Although certain indentations suggested a shape of some kind, it was impossible in the dark to make it out. So I tore a piece of the hem of my robe and laid a fragment on the ground at right angles to the wall. In groping my way around, I would not fail to find the rag on completing the circuit. I counted 100 paces in all, and so presumed the diameter of the dungeon to be 50 yards. Quitting the wall, I resolved to cross the area of the enclosure, cautiously at first, but as I became more courageous, my step became more firm. After about 10 or 12 paces, however, I tripped on the remnant of the torn hem of my robe and fell violently upon my face. In the confusion attending my fall, I did not immediately apprehend a somewhat startling circumstance. It was this. My chin rested on the floor, but my lips and the upper portion of my head touched nothing. At the same time, my forehead seemed bathed in this clammy vapor, and a peculiar smell of decay arose to my nostrils. I reached out my hand and discovered that I had fallen at the brink of a circular pit. Groping about the masonry just below the margin, I dislodged a small stone fragment and let it fall into the abyss. For many seconds I listened as it fell down, down, down into the water with a sudden plunge, succeeded by reverberating echoes. I saw clearly the doom that had been laid out for me, and congratulated myself on the timely accident by which I had escaped. For the victims of the Inquisition, there was either death in its direst physical agonies or death with its most hideous psychological horrors. I had been reserved for the latter. I groped my way back to the margin of the wall, resolving to perish there rather than face the horrors of the pit. Neither could I forget what I'd read of these pits, that the sudden extinction of life formed no part of their most horrible plan. Agitation of spirit kept me awake for long hours, but eventually I fell to sleep.
My soul shall find itself alone in the dark thoughts of the grey tombstone. None have found a crowd to pry into thine hour of secrecy, into thine hour of secrecy.
Upon waking, I found by my side some bread and a jug of water. A burning thirst consumed me, and I emptied the vessel at a draught. But it must have been drugged, for no sooner had I drunk it than an even deeper sleep fell upon me. A sleep like that of death.
The night, though clear, shall frown, and the stars shall not throw down from their highest thrones in heaven light like hope to mortals given, light like hope to mortals given. Stars of fire without a beam, to thy weariness shall seem as a burning and a fever which would cling to thee forever, which would cling to thee forever, which would cling to thee forever, which would cling to thee forever.
How long I slept, I know not. But when I opened my eyes, the objects around me were visible by a sort of sulphurous luster, the source of which I was not able to discern. I was able to make out the extent and aspect of my prison. In size and shape, I had been mistaken. The entire circuit of the walls did not exceed 25 yards, and the space within was square. What I had taken to be masonry was in fact iron, in huge plates whose joints occasioned the indentations which I had felt. And the entire enclosure was rudely daubed with figures of demons and skeleton forms and aspects of menace. The floor was made of stone, and in the centre yawned the circular pit from whose jaws I had escaped. My condition had greatly changed whilst I slept. I now laid out on a kind of low wooden framework. To this I was securely bound by a long strap which passed about my body and limbs, leaving at liberty only my head and my left arm, but only to the extent that I could just reach out and touch a plate of meat which lay beside me. Looking up to the ceiling, I surveyed the ceiling of the prison about 40 feet above me. On it, directly painted above my head, was a painted figure of time as he is most commonly depicted. But instead of a scythe, he held a huge pendulum such as we see on old clocks. As I gazed further, I perceived that this pendulum was in fact a machine, and that it was moving from side to side, its sweep brief and slow. A slight noise attracted my notice. I looked down and saw several enormous rats. They had come from the pit. As I looked down, many more came up in fresh hordes with ravenous eyes drawn by the scent of the meat. I waved them away with my free hand. It was many hours before I again looked up to the ceiling. And what I then saw both confounded and amazed me. The sweep of the pendulum had increased by at least a yard, and as a natural consequence, so had its velocity. But what mainly disturbed me was that it had perceptibly descended. I now observed with horror that it was formed of a crescent of glittering steel. The under edge was as sharp as a razor, and the whole hideous device hissed as it swung through the air. So this is what my torturers had prepared for me. They'd obviously seen of my escape from the pit whose horrors had been destined for so bold a dissenter as myself. The pit, typical of hell and regarded by rumour as to be the ultimate of their punishments. So was the pendulum to be a milder death? Milder? There is little point in telling of the long hours of horror during which I counted the rushing oscillations of the steel. Inch by inch, with a descent only noticeable at intervals, down, steadily down it came. Days passed, it may have been many days, ere it swung so closely as to fan me with its acrid breath. I grew frantically mad, trying to force myself away from its fearful sweep. And yet, even amid the agonies of this time, the human nature still craved food. And I reached out for the remnant of meat that had been spared me by the rats. And as I put it to my lips, the germ of an idea occurred to me, but I couldn't think. I couldn't reason. The motion of the pendulum was designed to cross over the heart. Soon it would fray the cloth of my robe and repeat its operations again and again. Down steadily it crept to the right, to the left, with a shriek of a damned soul. Down, relentlessly down. It now swung within 3 inches of my chest. Down, unceasingly, relentlessly down. I gasped. I convulsed in fear. I saw that another 10 or 12 passes would bring the steel into actual contact with the cloth of my robe. And with this observation, there suddenly came over my spirit all the keen, collected calmness of despair. For the first time in hours, or perhaps it was days, I was able to think. I realized that only one long strap bound me to the wooden framework, and if it could be severed in any place, I could loosen it and make my escape. But the strap had been cunningly placed around and across every part of my body except in the path of the blade. And then that half-formed idea became suddenly present, scarcely sane, scarcely definite, but still entire. The floor around the frame on which I lay had been literally swarming with rats. They were wild, bold, ravenous. They were glaring at me, looking at me, waiting for me to become insensible. To what food, I thought, have they become accustomed to in the depths of the pit? In their voracity for the oily, spicy meat which I now held in my hands, they had frequently bitten my fingers. So, I thoroughly rubbed the strap with the meat wherever I could reach, and then lay breathlessly still. And sure enough, observing that I remained motionless, two of the boldest leapt upon the frame and began to sniff the binding. This was the signal for a general rush. Forth from the well they hurried in fresh troops. They clung to the wood, they overran it, they leapt in hundreds upon my body. The pendulum disturbed them not at all. Avoiding its strokes, they busied themselves with the anointed strap. They pressed, they swarmed, they writhed about my throat. Another minute and surely the thing would be accomplished. Yes! I felt the loosening of the strap. The pendulum cut the cloth of my robe and now split the linen beneath. I waved the rats away. Another 2 strokes and it cut my flesh. Now was the time to escape. With a steady movement, I slid from the embrace of the strap and beyond reach of the scimitar. I was free! For the moment at least, the pendulum stopped and was drawn up into the ceiling by some invisible force. I knew that my inquisitors were watching, and that although I'd escaped one mode of death, another would surely follow. With this thought, I cast my eyes around the iron barriers which hemmed me in. The sulphurous light came from a crack, a gap of about half an inch running around the base. And now, the daubed figures assumed an intense brilliance that gave them a wild and ghastly vivacity not visible before. There was a suffocating odour of heated iron, and moment by moment, a deeper glow settled in the eyes that glared at my agonies. As the heat from the walls became unbearable, I was driven to the edge of the pit, where I saw, illuminated by the enkindled ceiling, the death that awaited me at the bottom. Oh, horror. Oh, any horror but this. I shrank back to the rapidly heating walls away from the pit. Anything but the pit, any death but the pit. Then there came a grating, rumbling sound. I watched with terror as the apartment began to change its form and size. The walls themselves were moving, closing in, forcing me to the brink of the pit. Soon there was no longer an inch of foothold on the prison floor, and the agony of my soul found vent in one long and final shriek of despair. Suddenly there was the sound of human voices. A loud blast as of 1,000 trumpets, a rumbling as of 1,000 thunders. The fiery walls rushed back. An outstretched hand caught my own as I fell. It was the hand of General Lasalle. The French army had entered Toledo. The Inquisition was in the hands of its enemies.